Strap yourselves in, folks. This isn't going to be pretty. During the run-up to the Brexit referendum of 2016, feels like the good old days now, doesn't it? Michael Gove, in that campaign, said he'd had enough of experts. Now, at the time, I thought he was a bit of a silly sausage for saying that. Well, now I know exactly what he means. Wherever you look, data, not projections or imaginary graphs, but data suggests lockdowns may be having little effect. They may, in fact, be counterproductive. And at the moment, areas that have seen the strictest restrictions are producing the highest numbers of cases. It's funny that, isn't it? It's almost like you can't halt the spread of an infectious virus. Like it's got its own curve, its own trajectory. Who knew? Now, let's talk about the Nightingale hospitals. This is important. When they were constructed at lightning speed early in the pandemic, the Nightingale hospitals were considered a proud national achievement. However, months on, they lie empty. They were never used. Far from being a great national achievement, the Nightingale hospitals now stand as expensive monuments to scientific miscalculation. We didn't want to use them, of course not, but it's telling that we never got close to having to. And don't get me started on ventilators. Do you remember the hysterical clamour for ventilators? We've got to have ventilators. We've got to have ventilators. Well, we have those ventilators. £500 million worth. That's right, £500 million worth. Almost every single one of them unused and gathering dust. It's not an achievement. It's a scandal. Now, in my book, everyone gets a free pass for what happened in March. COVID was an unknown quantity, and a 3 or 4 week lockdown to ensure our wonderful NHS is not overwhelmed, it's got to be worth a punt. At this point, I'll remind you, the virus peaked in April. So here we are now in October, and the madness continues unabated. Bars and restaurants in central Scotland have shut down, a devastating hammer blow to the economies of Glasgow, Edinburgh, and beyond. It's borderline criminal. It's pretty clear that First Minister Sturgeon, General Sturgeon, we've upgraded her. Remember, Scotland is now just a semi-democracy. General Sturgeon is actually in charge of UK COVID strategy, because when General Sturgeon locks down, Corporal Johnson, her underling in Westminster, follows suit. But it's actually not for Boris or for Nicola or any of the politicians that I reserve my ire today. I've reserved my ire, and I've got loads of ire, so much ire, and I've reserved it for the so-called experts. Take Messrs Whitty and Vallance, the worst double act since Hale and Pace, with their projections of doom and the graph that wasn't a graph, or the randy prof Neil Ferguson, a man who terrified the Prime Minister all those months ago with a projected death toll of 500,000. This is a crisis of politics, certainly, but it's an even bigger crisis of science. Sweden, a surprisingly highly densely populated country that did not lock down, kept its schools, hospitalities and offices open and never mandated face coverings. Well, Sweden, a bit like those Nightingale hospitals, serves as a potentially huge embarrassment to the science and projections that we followed here. Sweden, by the looks of it, shames us. Now, perhaps everyone in Sweden is suddenly going to get COVID in the next 10 minutes. And if so, fair enough. But according to most experts, the Swedes are out of the woods now. And life there is more or less back to normal. No curfews, no masks, no arrows in shops. Are you sick of those arrows? Voices of dissent are growing. The University of Edinburgh have just published a report in which they say that our failure to achieve herd immunity by attempting to control the virus may now cause more deaths in the long run because we have lower community immunity. Now, do you remember the moral backlash about how brutal and Darwinistic and cruel the concept of herd immunity was. Do you remember that moral backlash? Well, we're now hearing that the much maligned herd immunity might have saved lives, not cost them. Yes, it turns out that viruses aren't woke. They don't look at Twitter, they're not on Facebook. They don't care what we think. And as we have been attacked by viruses throughout our natural history, they never have. There are growing concerns from many thousands of globally renowned scientists and medics who have signed up to a campaign called the Great Barrington Declaration to change course. And they fear that we are going to hell in a handcart with at best flaky and at worst wrong science. And the folly continues as we await this famed vaccine. Now, I can tell you, I'll give you an exclusive on Drive of what the main ingredient of this vaccine currently is. Snake oil. Because to have a strategy that presides over the destruction of economies, societies and people's way of life for hope of a vaccine is like watching your house burn down in the hope that someone will eventually come along and retrofit a sprinkler system. And so now, as Rome metaphorically burns, businesses closing, shops and restaurants boarded up, unemployment spiralling, national debt exploding, and many thousands of other illnesses going undiagnosed and untreated, our Prime Minister is considering further draconian lockdowns in the north of England, producing further economic and social devastation and perpetuating the north-south divide for at least another generation. It's kind of the opposite of levelling up. I think you'll agree. We need a far wider diversity of views on this. We need a national conversation, and I want to have it here at Talk Radio. Local mayors and city officials are already digging their heels in. We've spoken to them on this programme. And following a court case in Spain, the city of Madrid have just said, no, we have to stop the madness. And the only way to do that is to look at the data, have a wider range of voices advising the government, and work out where we are going wrong. This actually isn't politics, and it shouldn't be up to the politicians. It's the science, stupid. This is Talk Radio.